This is episode 99 of Stand Up. Joining me today, the Backyard Barbecue segment I'm doing with my two insider DC insider friends, Bill Boyle and Jon Katz of the German Marshall Fund. Bill Boyle's of nothing, but Jon Katz is of the German Marshall Fund. Also joining me, Barry Ritholtz, who's got a cover story in Business Week about how we need to go big, a moonshot for the economy. I'll tell him why. I don't think it's going to happen. Barry Ritholtz, Bill Boyle, Jon Katz, I'm Pete Dominick. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello and hi. Hello and hi. And thank you for joining me here. Got a very special show for you because right now I'm looking at my parents on a Zoom chat. Hey, Dad.
Yeah, hi, Mary.
Don't tell her what.
Hi, Dad.
Don't tell her what to say.
Hi, honey.
You guys are in the same room and saying hi to me.
We're actually in the same house, but we're in different rooms.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, my parents are joining me, as you just heard. I'm talking to them on video because, well, mainly I didn't have anybody to talk to for this rant. That's what I miss about.
We weren't doing anything.
Yeah, you guys are just hanging out.
Not even that.
Well, I don't know what that. Anyway, I miss doing the live show and having an audience of people. I like to be in a room of people, so I had a rant which needed feedback and response. So I called you guys. Thank you for joining me. What were you doing? Watching bowling?
I'm big on rants.
Well, we were watching the ALCS when the Yankees were winning 3-0.
You know,
watching the fourth game, and Mario Rivera just came in to pitch.
I figured like big sports fans that like to watch sports on television like yourself, especially would want to be watching some of their favorite all time games. And
it's not my favorite. I know what happens.
Right, so you don't like to watch things where you know the ending of.
Well, yeah, but this is the series when the Yankees were winning 3-0, 3-0.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember what happened then?
Yeah, they ended up losing.
They lost 4 games in a row, yeah.
And that brings back a certain level of frustration.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
I like to watch the game because there's a lot of my favorite players, former players.
Right.
It's fun to see the old guys.
Mom, did you like baseball before you met Dad?
I did, but I love it more now.
You played
That's what brought us together.
Baseball brought you together?
No.
Oh. You guys played. I remember when I was little, you played together on a softball team where, Dad, you were like the manager and pitcher. Am I right about that?
He can't hear you, apparently.
He's gone. There goes my podcast.
You can still hear me.
So were you guys on the same team?
We were on a co-ed softball team where I was the left-handed second base person. That doesn't work really well.
Why is that? You can't be left-handed. Oh, I see. You can't throw to the harder to throw to first.
Better to be right-handed.
Right.
That's okay because Jeff Clark always came in and jumped in and took over for me.
Oh, was he that guy that kind of got in the way and took the ball from you? Or
well, he took the ball a lot, but I wouldn't say he got in the way because I probably wouldn't have gotten it gotten it to first base.
Before Dad figures out how to get back in. Poor guy. He's out there frustrated because you're getting more airtime. How was he as like he was the manager and pitcher, right? Like the main pitcher. Yeah. How did he do with that? Did he get competitive?
How did he deal with it, or how did he do with it?
Was he real competitive? Was it more of a rec league?
Yeah, competitive. We had a lot of fun though, but he was competitive. Yeah, he got a little intense sometimes.
Yeah. Any you guys ever had any brawls, like bench clearing brawls?
No.
Oh.
You and Brian were there a lot of the times.
Yeah, I recall that. I recall hanging out at those games, and those were fun times. I just admitted Dad back in to the Zoom, so he should be. Oh, there he is.
Okay. Nana and Papa went to some of the games too.
Those are my grandparents on the my dad's side. We call them Nana and Papa. They would show up at the games. You back, Dad? Can we hear you? Oh, he's turning his sound on, I think. Here he comes.
Yep.
The Zoom thing.
Darn it. We could have talked a lot about him before you got back on.
There you go.
Okay. So.
Are you talking about me?
Nope.
I said we could have.
Nothing happened, Dad. Welcome back. Don't touch anything.
I didn't touch anything.
Where did it just disappeared?
Yeah, it just and the Wi-Fi is right here. I'm right next to the tracer.
You couldn't be any closer to the, what did you call it? What is it? What is the thing?
A router? Do you think maybe
the router? Yeah, the tracer router. Yeah, the Wi-Fi. Do you know what Wi-Fi stands for?
What?
I'm just asking.
Oh, yeah. I think it's something, wireless...
wireless finality.
Finality. I think it is, yeah. Anyway.
You wanted all this out, aren't you?
I wanted to...
No. The rant. I want to hear about it.
This is gold. Well, I wanted to talk tonight. I wanted to do a little rant about the anti-vax movement and get your thoughts on it, being whoever you are and whatever age you are, you know? And your thoughts on whether or not, when we were little, if you had any, you know, real concerns about, you know, it's real distracting when I'm trying to talk to you, Dad. My dad is holding a bottle up to the camera like a child while I'm trying to do my thing.
Don't drink it, Chuck. It's sanitizer.
It says that you're not supposed to on the bottle.
What is that a bottle of?
And it's a Beacon Skiff Apple Orchards sanitizer.
He's sitting right next to the Wi-Fi signal, the tracer, Mom, and he keeps cutting out.
Yeah, he has Beacon Skiff hand sanitizer. He got it yesterday.
It's an apple orchard in my hometown, and now they're selling hand sanitizer because they make alcohol, and that's the main ingredient in hand sanitizer, if I'm not mistaken.
It is the main ingredient,
well,
yes.
They certainly know how to adapt to, you know, a market, huh? They go from apples.
A lot of places have.
To alcohol.
The distilleries have.
Yep. They sell, how do you know all that?
Well, because we have a friend who has a distillery.
Well, of course you do. You guys are moonshiners yourselves, aren't you?
He wants you to let him in.
Running rum. Oh, let him in the Zoom. All right, welcome back for a second time. My dad, Chuck Dominic, who's a regular guest here, commentator on the show. So anyway, anti-vax, okay? This whole movement and what it has led to, I've long held that this has been very dangerous and not a fringe movement, the anti-vax movement, you know, and a lot of my smart friends have said we shouldn't give them the attention, and yet they seem to gain ground. And Donald Trump, in my opinion, is an anti-vaxxer. He's a conspiracy theorist. And when I was in Cleveland, Mom and Dad, for the Republican National Convention, you know, I was there at the arena in Cleveland in 2016 in the summer, June, I think.
I'm sorry for you.
It was great. I went to I always enjoyed going to those conventions and covering them for SiriusXM. It was a really unique and experience and opportunity, and I had access to all kinds of very interesting folks. But I interviewed a lot of the Trump supporters there, and I remember I did this one segment where I went out with a microphone, and I just asked the people that were there in attendance, the delegates who were there supporting Donald Trump. I said, what do you think about that he is such a big-time conspiracy theorist? And I named 3 conspiracy city folks. The birther, Obama's birth certificate is always, a conspiracy theory. There's never anything to it, of course. And Trump, of course, was the main inspiration for that, right? He was a leader on that. And then the climate change denial is another conspiracy theory that Donald Trump believed in. Again, these are by definition, these are textbook conspiracy theories, right? And he trafficked in a lot of the anti-vax stuff. And those are the questions that I asked them. And the folks there said, well, I didn't know that, or whatever they came up with, they were easily, they dismissed it. It wasn't too big of a concern. Some people are like, well, that's a little troubling. I didn't know that. I want to look into that. Nonetheless, here we are now in the midst of a pandemic, and our only hope, our real hope, is a vaccine, which is like 1.5 years away. We don't even know if it will be effective. And that's like our best hope to get back to kind of a sense of normality, as long as we're not going to be able to practice all the other important public health, social distancing and everything else, and masks and all that. So here we are in this situation, and we're developing this vaccine. And these people, guys, might not even they might not even take it. They're ranting against it. And there's this whole conspiracy, and it's Bill Gates, and they're trying to microchip us. And so my question to you is, do you know these people? What do you think of this idea? What was the first you heard of it? What are your thoughts on anti-vax flat earthers? Mom.
I think they are very foolish. They are brainwashed. Actually, one of my nieces does not vaccinate her children because she has an autistic son, and she believes that it could be caused by vaccines. Anyway, I think they're crazy, and I can't wait to get this vaccine because I don't want to die of not being able to breatad.
Doesn't sound like
die of COVID-19.
Right. Doesn't sound like
I'm going to die, but I don't want to die in that way.
Dad, what are your thoughts?
Can you hear me okay? My screen's frozen.
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. Yeah, because if you get a vaccine, you probably won't get the. Actually, if you're one of these believers in this and you don't get the vaccine, you might die, and maybe we're better off without you.
Yeah, I understand that theory, and I actually don't have a problem with it. I really don't, except
it's a terrible thought.
Well,
because that's how they feel about old people. They're at the end of their life, so if they die from COVID-19, they were due anyway.
Right. They're right
on anybody, but if they don't get the vaccine and they die, that's their choice.
Well, there's two problems, though, with that theory, which I would support, which is, number one, they have kids, so they're not also vaccinating their kids, and that's not fair to them. Obviously, it's not their fault. And number two, if they don't get the vaccine and they die, fine, but they're still a host. They can still give it to you. That's why vaccines are important. That's why I got an argument with some guy on Twitter tonight, Mom, and he's like, I respect your opinion. Why can't you respect mine? I'm like, because this isn't about the size and role of government. This is, you're not going to vaccinate your kids and they're going to be in school with my kids. Hell no. No.
Well, if they don't vaccinate their kids and you vaccinate yours, then they will likely not get ill.
On a more serious note, your mom and I were kids when they came out with the Salk vaccine, okay? And I believe that it was an oral vaccine because, as I remember, we all went down to the nurse's office and we stood in line, and the nurse gave us a spoonful or something of the vaccine, if I remember it correctly, because it was like, we're talking 65 years ago. But nobody objected. Everybody got vaccinated because everybody knew how bad polio was, and then polio went away. There was no question about it. And I don't remember anybody ever saying, "Oh my gosh, I got vaccinated against polio, and now I've got drop foot or something." Nothing ever happened. But
the hell is drop? What in God's green earth is drop foot?
That's where you can't lift your foot up.
Okay, never heard of it. Never heard of it.
That just popped into my head.
Yeah, I just never heard it. I've never heard that thing. Okay,
well, that's a true thing. I mean, your nerve goes dead, and you can't lift your foot up.
Is it a thing that you think a doctor announces to a patient? Do you think the doctor's like, "I'm sorry, Chuck, I've just gotten the results back, and it looks like you've got drop foot."
Yeah. It's a real thing. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how these people get to believing these theories. This is actually the thing that I really wanted to say tonight. And it's the videos on the internet that we now are all able to see are very well done because cameras are cheap and editing software is easy to use. And you can make a slick video, and within that slick video, you can have a slick argument, I mean, we've all been convinced by a convincing argument about a thing when we don't really have much information on it, right? It's hard to challenge this argument. Like, wow, that really happened? Well, I didn't know that. That's what a lot of these videos do. They connect dots and they create ideas and theories. I mean, it started back after 9/11 when the internet was really heating up and cameras were ubiquitous and software was easy to use. And they made all these crazy videos about September 11th. The planes didn't really hit the buildings and they were holographs and all that bullshit. and they were pretty convincing, very convincing. And I bought some of that shit at the time. I've bought a lot of this stuff, and then what I generally do is I go back and I try to find out if anybody else has anything critical to say about the argument, especially when it's these slick videos. But when you get into arguments with folks that have been convinced by these videos that really legitimately propaganda that radicalize people into, at times, cults, right? They become cults. And what they say is, I've done my research, Dad. I've done my research. And my point about that is, no, you haven't. No. Doing a Google search and watching a video is not research. If you're not in a lab, with a degree conducting research, then you don't get to challenge that guy. What do you think about that theory, Dad? I've done my research on the internet.
It's funny because I was looking at Snopes last night because I was trying to get to
Snopes a good source.
Yeah, I'm reading it, going like, boy, they're giving their opinion in here, which I wasn't too crazy about, and that's a reliable source on the internet.
Is giving opinions?
Yeah, they kind of gave an opinion. I read into what it was saying, and it was like, well, but anyways. Do
you remember what the fact checking you were doing was?
Yeah.
What was it? You don't want to say?
Well, I was looking up about Obama and his drones. If he ever threatened to drone a boy who took out his daughter.
Oh, wow.
Because he did threaten.
I think Obama threatened to drone somebody at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Yeah.
As
you were there.
Yeah, I was there. He did do that as a joke, and he was rightly criticized for it.
Yeah, I remember hearing that, and I go like, well, that seems to me like an abuse of your executive powers.
It's a tough one, right, Dad? Because if you're the president of the United States and you're doing stand-up, you want to be able to do a joke where someone gets droned. It's a good joke, but it's inappropriate.
Yeah, especially when you just droned a whole family at a wedding the day before. Yeah.
What was that really? Did it really the day before people died accidentally?
Well, I don't know if it was the day before.
Oh,
but it's a bad optic.
No, it's a bad optic. Yeah, no, it's not. I agree that he should have been right. Yeah. Anyway, but that's the Snopes thing.
Are we off the subject yet?
Yes. So getting back to doing research on the internet, Mom, for something like this, for vaccines. What do you think when someone says, "Well, I've done my research," and that person is like a teacher friend of yours or something, or someone with a degree but not a scientist?
You have to do research that involves scientists. You have to pay attention to what science is saying, not what conspiracists,
yeah. Hard.
Conspirators, whatever. You have to pay attention to science.
Well, what do you say when they say, well, the scientists are in on it?
Well, I say that I disagree. I don't believe that.
Dad, the scientists are in on it.
Yeah, that's probably true. They're all in the take. Yeah.
They have evidence. Scientists have evidence. They have facts.
They have empirical evidence and facts, scientific evidence and facts, right? I mean, it's like DNA evidence for a crime scene. It's like your hair was there. I don't know what to tell you.
I think people are always looking for some excuse or something they can churn up a conspiracy about. I can't understand people not wanting to protect themselves and their children and other people.
Well, they don't see it that way. Now you're making me defend them. They think they're protecting themselves. They think they are. I mean, I had a guy tweet me tonight. He's like, maybe you'll see the light someday, to me, about vaccines. I mean, what?
And he's going to get COVID and get very, very sick sometime.
Very likely he will if he doesn't. If there's a vaccine and he does not get it.
Yeah.
Do you think?
The more you listen to the argument on either side, the more futile it sounds, because you have reasoning on one side. Well, each side thinks they have reasoning. A perfect example, this is still on the subject, but the interview you did the other day with, was it Kirshner?
Glenn Kirshner, yeah.
Glenn Kirshner, okay. if you got an extreme right winger, ultra conservative,
yeah,
and they wouldn't believe that interview. That interview was one of the best interviews I've ever heard anybody. I
agree with you, because they would think he's part of the deep state. He's protecting the FBI. He worked with the FBI. Yeah, right. Is that what you mean?
Everything he stated was fact.
Well, a lot of it was his opinion, I think.
Well, a lot of it was fact. I mean, he said they were being accused. My point is that if you want to believe something and you refuse to follow any other reasoning, I hate to say it, but I'd rather listen to Fox News today than any other channel. Depending on whose show it is, not these opinion, not Hanny, but because they bring both sides of the argument in.
Wait a second.
They're willing to criticize their own team.
Oof.
And MSNBC and NBC don't do that.
Oh,
but
come on.
The point is that I'm willing to go there, listen to them, see what they've got to say, because I am kind of interested.
Are you honestly saying right now on the record that Fox News has more balance on their programming than CNN and MSNBC?
More balance? Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not saying they're fair.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're model. They're fair and balanced. What I am saying is that, they had Nancy Pelosi. They interviewed Nancy Pelosi, and they did a fair interview with Nancy Pelosi, and they did the vice president back to back. I've never seen that on MSNBC or CNN. They do it
all day, every day on MSNBC and CNN. All day, every day. Furthermore, a lot of those people refuse to go on those networks because they don't want to answer for Trump. Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
But you are factually wrong. As you know, I work at MSNBC and CNN often, and nobody does. CNN has, tons of these people in the payroll that were former Trump people for a year, up until very recently. So,
but are they on TV?
Yes, I'm going to completely dismiss what you just said about balance, but let's move on about Fox News. It's outrageous that you would say. Also,
I wanted to make an outrageous statement.
Also, though, I do think that a lot of MSNBC and CNN at this point has editorially decided that the president of the United States is an absolute madman, and it's not journalistic integrity to cover him as if he is not. And Fox News is acting like he is a sane person and a decent leader. I think editorially, most responsible journalists have decided, using empirical evidence based on the man's own behavior, he's an absolute fucking insane person and says one thing one moment, another thing another moment, insults journalists in a way that makes no sense. They don't even make sense, the insults.
And then lies about what he didn't say or did say.
Whereas Fox News presents him as actually, they put him in front of Abraham Lincoln the other night.
Mm-hmm.
By doing that. And these are their straight news reporters, Brett Baer and who is the woman? I don't know. They put him in front of Lincoln as if to present him in any possible comparison to that man. And then, given that setting, Trump compared himself to Lincoln, but said he had it worse than Lincoln. Lincoln was assassinated.
Yeah. Well, you could always hope.
No, we're just waiting for a good thunderstorm, a lightning strike while he's out playing golf.
Oh, you two people are terrible.
Terrible.
So,
hey, back to the vaccine thing. I just want to say that you cannot convince someone who believes something like that. You can't change their mind. You could try really hard, but it's very, very difficult. And it's the same thing as they can't change my mind.
Well, there's research that actually says that even when presented with the best evidence and the best arguments, they still won't change their mind. But Dad, I want to go back to what you said, because there was a flaw in the argument when you were like, you mentioned Glenn Kirshner and that you thought he was right, and that there's another. We're talking about there isn't two sides. there's no balance here. There is no disagreement amongst epidemiologists about pandemics and viruses, right? Like they all understand as best as they can what's happening.
Yeah.
And so why would we question what kind of arrogance would I have to have, me, with my education and my background, to question epidemiologists? Would it not seem to you?
You have a 2-year degree from Cobleskill. What do you mean?
Yes, I do. In humanities, liberal arts and humanities.
Yeah, well,
but even if I had a 6-year degree in constitutional law, I still wouldn't have any right to question the people who had spent their lives doing this research. The idea that I'm going to go do a Google search and then tell an epidemiologist that they're wrong what is that to you? To me, that is so arrogant and stupid and embarrassing. They'd be like you telling your friend Dan, the orthopedic surgeon, this is not, I don't think, an inappropriate comparison, how to perform a surgery. Because you looked it up online. You watched one. You watched a surgery online on YouTube. So now you have the right to go tell him what he's doing right or wrong. Same thing.
Well, they do like you to be informed.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical drug companies are advertising that tell you what to tell your doctor.
Yeah. Ask
your doctor if blank is for you.
The whole.
But let me just. Am I right about that? That Mike, I do have a question. Isn't it arrogant? Isn't it arrogant to question scientists if you aren't a scientist?
These people, they look at it as gray. It's not black and white to them. To me, it's black and white. Okay, they look at it as gray, which I don't get it. I don't understand how they do that. It's weird. I mean, because so many lives have been saved. So many lives are better because we do have vaccines.
Billions with a B. But people are living that wouldn't be living.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. With a B. And
malaria and polio alone would have wiped out,
When we were kids, everybody got chicken pox, measles, and mumps. Everybody got it. If you didn't get it, there was something wrong with you, I think. And then a lot of people got
something polio. Right with you.
Well,
superhero.
Well, and then if you didn't get it, you got it later in life, you were sorry. But anyways. But we had vaccines for all that stuff, and it was all totally eradicated. And now I understand some of these vaccinators or whatever the hell they're called.
Anti-vaxxers. They're anti-tracers.
They actually think that you shouldn't get vaccinated for that stuff, and it's insanity. I mean, just go out and get the disease, and then tell me you shouldn't get vaccinated for it.
So why do they think you shouldn't get vaccinated? Tell me that, Chuck.
Well, they think it has side effects that makes them have bad things happen to them worse. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's worse than chicken pox, measles, and mumps and all that stuff. I mean, that has lifelong. You get that, you could be paying for that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it doesn't. Your friend John had polio when he was a boy, and he walks funny. Yeah. He might have had drop foot.
Yeah,
he can't see well anymore. They say.
Can you get drop feet?
Can I?
It's the plural. It's more than 1 foot.
You can, yes.
Let me go back to my point, though, and just try to be a little bit more clear and again, try to get a response as to what you think about this. I'm saying it's arrogant to question the scientific consensus. I wouldn't want to discourage someone from doing the best research that they have available to them on an illness, on anything that we talk about that's important in life. But at some point, when when armed with your research that you've done on any kind of issue, you go to people, you go to experts. You've done some research on some legal matter, maybe your own, and then you go to a lawyer and you say, "Listen, I heard you could do this or you could do that." You go to a doctor. Could I try this treatment or that treatment? Or you look something up about climate change that challenges the consensus that you've been led to believe. So you go to a climate scientist. I'm saying, be responsible, do research, be a critical thinker. But at some point, your, quote, research is done, and you have to go to the experts on these scientific issues especially.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a normal way of thinking, right? Like that's how we should be. It would be arrogant to tell a scientist that you know more than them because you watched a few videos, right? Arrogant.
I'm getting a little nervous about these future vaccines that so many scientists are coming up with, so many pharmaceutical companies, because they're rushing it so. And they're not going to be able to take the time that you normally would take to make sure that it's safe. And we don't know if they're going to come up with one that's safe for everybody or.
Well, I think they have to run it through the same set of trials. I don't think they can rush it. I don't.
They're rushing them. That's what
they are rushing them, because there's an active pandemic, but they still have to be tried in a way. Why do you have that fear?
They're testing them now on people. Some people are volunteering to test the vaccines that they're coming up with.
Well, they don't think they have a vaccine to test now, do they?
Yeah, they do. They're starting.
Don't ever doubt me. I'm right.
I don't know what to tell you. Who you were talking about?
Germany and Pfizer. Pfizer and Germany are getting together, and they are actually testing them on humans.
Okay, well, again, I'll look that up. I'll ask the experts. I've been given this piece of information by my parents. I won't make an assumption. All right. Well, I guess
we got it on the Comedy Channel. That's where we got it.
Oh, all right. Well, might be testing on vaccine testing, Germany.
I just don't want to I don't want to get a vaccine until I know for sure that it is perfect for us.
So why don't you just be like, go in with Dad and be like, just give it to him first.
That's a good idea.
Thanks, honey.
If he survives, then I'll get it.
We're in different rooms right now. Maybe we'll.
Dad, if there were only one vaccine left, and it were just you and Mom, what would you do with it, Dad?
I'd take it.
He would today, but yesterday he wouldn't have.
Oh, what happened yesterday?
Well, no, yesterday everything was fine, but today
you guys had an argument, and now he wants to take the
things going on.
Now he wants to
together too much.
Take the only vaccine left. Wow, things really got bad.
He'd give it to me.
I know he would, of course. All right, thank you.
Okay, Petey.
Love you. Bye.
Love you.
That's it.
Bye.
You want to do more? It was 30 minutes we talked, and you were gone for half of it because you're.
It was kind of, it wasn't your best.
Well, what do you want to say to add to it?
I had a couple of things I was going to say.
On vaccines and conspiracy theorists?
I don't remember what they were now.
All right. Well,
it was pretty interesting.
We'll do it again soon.
Okay, but don't edit this one out. But today I saw a post about the lady that in Kentucky that wore a mask, but she cut a hole in it for her nose and mouth because she felt like she couldn't breathe. So I thought it was so, and first of all, I didn't know if it was true or not. So I didn't say like it was true. I said, but if this really did happen, remember that she is from Kentucky and they keep voting Mitch McConnell in. Well, I am telling you, I didn't get one negative comment to me. Everybody jumped in there. There were hundreds and hundreds of comments, and many of them
on your post.
Pardon me?
On your post?
Well, yeah, somebody posted.
Your mother has 45,000 followers.
Oh, stop it. Somebody posted that picture. I made a comment on it. And apparently my comment was the top one or something because everybody remarked on that. And it was really fun, really, actually.
Do I really have to edit that out that you're saying Kentucky voters are stupid enough to vote for Mitch McConnell? I'll keep that in there.
One woman got on right away and she said, I'm from Kentucky and you're right.
There you go.
I'm glad you didn't take offense because I know that not all Kentuckians are that way, but let's just say she's from Kentucky and they continue to vote him in term after term after term. People were, I don't think maybe there was a comment that I didn't see because of course I'm not reading all the comments.
I think you are.
I read a lot of them, and every time they notify me that another comment, somebody mentioned my name, that's what I read.
All right, well, you can go friend my mom now on Facebook, everybody. Mary Dominic.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I hope it works out for her.
No, I have enough friends. I don't care.
All right, I'm leaving now for real. Love you. Bye.
Okay, love you.
All right, if you've got anything to add to my anti-vax conspiracy theorist rant, I'd love to hear from it. What are your arguments? How do you deal with these people? How much of a threat do you see them? I was arguing with a whole bunch of them on Twitter tonight as well. And, I enjoy it. It was hard to stop. Okay, so thank you to everybody who is signed up for paid subscriptions for new folks today. Jonathan McGrath, thank you very much, Jonathan. Welcome to our awesome, curious, passionate, hilarious, generous community. Leonard Berry, thank you, Leonard. Great to have you signed up. Daniel Gomez is now a member of our community here with a paid subscription. And Michael Todd upped his pledge from $25 to $50. You can always pay more, especially now that I'm doing a lot more if you can. And I appreciate all of you who do. All right, now I want to get to my next conversation. I'm calling this Backyard Politics with Jon Katz of the German Marshall Fund and Bill Boyle of, well, I don't know. What does Bill even do? We think he's in the CIA. He owns parking garages. Who knows? He's a real smart guy, and I love talking to him. He and John are old friends. I used to have, I've once had beers on Bill's patio in Washington, D.C. with John and Bill, and we're always text messaging and yammering on about politics and foreign policy. And I mean, I'm usually just sitting back watching them talk. But I thought we should take the chat from the patio and from text messages to the podcast. Here now is my conversation with Jon Katz of the German Marshall Fund, who worked at the State Department and USAID and a bunch of congressional campaigns. Really credible, qualified, connected guy. And, of course, Bill Boyle, and on Twitter at Bill B in DC. So I've got them both now. Katz has an extensive resume and has every right to be here on a show with as much merit, on a podcast from a garage with as much merit as this one. And Bill Boyle, who we love. Always love talking to you. Jonathan Katz, Bill Boyle, thank you very much for joining me in this three-way.
Good to see you.
Great. Thanks.
Tell me about, Boyle, tell me about your relationship with Katz so we can establish that you guys aren't just two panelists that I plucked out of obscurity.
So Katz and I have known each other since when? Katz, 99? 94?
2000.
Okay. Part of a bunch of absolute knuckleheads who all lived in this neighborhood in D.C. that was known to be a hipster neighborhood, which is weird. They allowed us in. And just one of those weird D.C. friendships where you know a guy who knows a guy, and then you end up being better friends than the guy you started with. And we've been friends ever since. We went to each other's weddings, and our kids hang out together. And, we live about 2 miles apart and have been friends for 20 years, basically.
And Katz, how is your relationship now? You guys are texting things all the time, texting about stuff and things and news and kids, and you talk? Do you get together?
Well, first, I'd like to deny everything Bill just said.
Because,
okay. It's better. You're more safe to disassociate yourself from Bill Boyle than associate yourself. But it's true. We've been longtime friends, and we're basically backyard political contributors and foreign policy analysts. And so obviously in the COVID-19 world, we have plenty of time by text to talk about all the challenges that are taking place, family, politics, what's taking place in DC, and obviously, Pete, to listen to you, which we spend most of our time doing.
Don't you guys just get together and turn on the podcast and shut up and listen?
We do. Listen to your podcast. It's awesome.
With some Hitachino and some beer. Yeah.
So it's funny you say backyard politics, because I was actually thinking about branding this conversation so that we could do it regularly. You know how branding is just the most important thing you can do. And I was like, some kind of fireside chat, but obviously not that. But I've been on this text chain with you guys for a couple of years. I know you guys are constantly talking about stuff, but backyard politics is the perfect theme for this discussion, for this segment. You guys know each other really well. You're always shooting shit about politics, domestic, and obviously foreign policy, for which John is a longtime expert. So let's just call it that for now. It doesn't have to have a name, but that's what it is, everybody. These guys know each other, and I thought, what better to have a great conversation about important things with guys that are really comfortable with each other, busting chops and everything. So let me start with asking you, because Bill, last time you were on the show, you talked about Cambodia and how so much of their economy rested on the clothing manufacturing industry. And so I thought maybe, Jonathan Katz, you could pick up from there and mention any kind of country that you're paying attention to. And if there are similar stories in terms of an economy being based entirely on, the industry of manufacturing one thing or one natural resource, like how is the pandemic playing out in foreign nations that very few Americans are having any interest in paying attention to because they're like, where's my mask?
Yeah. I mean, we should definitely be caring about what happens in countries globally too. It's a global pandemic. And so that, when you have a situation like this, and I know there's a lot of focus on China right now and where this originated from, but it's reached every country in the world. And the response to it has to be a global response. Otherwise, you have these weak spaces, these gray zones where the pandemic plays out in a way that can impact countries politically, economically, which has a direct impact on the United States and U.S. interests. So when I look at countries today, and I'm looking a lot at countries like Turkey, Ukraine, Hungary, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and in the Balkans, you can really see the economic impact. Some of these countries most of them are not dependent on just one. It may be different than an oil or energy dependent state economically, but a lot of them are working, are really facing a real crunch. You see rising unemployment. You see rising polarization within countries. You see leaders that are taking advantage of the political moment to achieve political objectives, like in Hungary or Russia or Turkey. Yeah. And it's a mess.
When you say, when I take a look at countries, because you are who you are and have the connections you have and the experience and resources, I mean, how much, when you pay attention to what's happening in a foreign country, are you looking at newspaper? Are you talking to friends that live and work in those countries, your former or current counterparts in those countries, or are you reading their news? Do you have some kind of special binder or something that you have access to for foreign policy analysts that the rest of us don't have?
No, I mean, I think actually it's certainly all of the above. And so the place I work at, the German Marshall Fund, we have offices throughout Europe. We also are a grant maker. That means that we give money to organizations, civil society organizations, independent media, to engage on the COVID-19 related activities, but also that are monitoring and evaluating governments. So I'm working with a lot of people who spent a lot of years and time monitoring governments and what they're doing. So I see in both newspapers, I hear it directly from people that are on the ground. I hear from people who our organization has directly worked with for the last couple of decades. And I'm talking to U.S. officials and I'm hosting them. And tomorrow I'm going to host an event with the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Eastern Europe, a guy named Jon Katz. You guys may have recognized that name. Who's been long involved in Ukraine. But also I recently released a podcast. Yes, I have a podcast, not as prolific as yours, but with the Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasia at USAID, talking about what the U.S. is doing on the ground. And so I'm talking, coordinating, working with people in a number of countries, including colleagues, diplomats, civil society organizations, independent media organizations, and people have been working 24/7 to give us an update on what's taking place. And the other aspect I'm doing is trying to expose what's happening. And so that's why even coming here today to talk a little bit about it highlights the deep challenges that we face. It also highlights the need for greater U.S. leadership in these spaces from now going forward. So you're hitting my sweet spot, and but that gives you a little bit of a background, just as somebody who's worked in this space for the last 2 decades. What we're picking up on.
So, John, I got a question for you. You're talking about global leadership, and of course, in the world right now, China is not ready to step up, and probably never will be, and Europe is not capable of doing it either. And with this administration, there's virtually no chance that the United States is going to lead anything. Doesn't that basically forestall any real unified response to this globally? Yeah, we can't even really have any unified response from the federal government within the United States. Why
can't somebody else lead? If the U.S. isn't going to, what it sounds like you're asking is, if the U.S. isn't going to lead and they're going to cede that leadership or they're going to create a vacuum, does anything get done, or can someone else step up?
No one's in a position to do it. I mean, China is really not strong enough and doesn't have the political capital. Nobody trusts them, and they do awful things. They're basically concentration camping the Uyghurs. They're not in a position to be a global leader. And
what's wrong with the French?
As well.
What about that guy? He seems to step into the void from time to time. They don't have the money, the power,
doing
the
a better job than Trump is by far. But John, what do you think? I mean, is there anyone that can?
So there's a couple things. One is that most of these countries are all dealing so internally with their own challenges that even the usual suspects for global leadership don't exist. And so that's where you see a country like China try to fill in the gap. But the way that they do it is by sending a plane load of mass or saying the United States is responsible for what took place. And U.S. leadership is critical, and it's always been critical. I think there's let's separate two things. One is the Trump leadership, which doesn't really exist globally, and it hasn't for the last couple of years. It's actually been sort of countering sort of global engagement or multilateralism. But what I do see, and I think I really want to sort of break down the barrier. There's a lot of good U.S. officials, diplomats, assistance providers, and a number of different departments and agencies that are working every day to provide support and engaging foreign partners. And they're doing good things. So I want to just be really, those guys are our frontline responders internationally, and they deserve some credit. And I'm not going to give the credit to Trump because I don't think he's aware or is engaged in this. But what I am thankful for is that for those people, whether they're in this Trump administration underneath that top layer that are doing the right thing, is to support the work that they're doing in a nonpartisan way. And it's really important to keep that work going, because in the absence of top level leadership, this other leadership has to exist long enough to be the bridge to when we have the right moment for the right type of leadership. And at the end of the day, Europe and others in the past have always followed the United States lead on these issues. And I think that leadership is needed again.
I think your mic is rubbing on your collar when you move your head when you talk. So
sorry.
That's all right. But,
okay.
But it's fine. But I mean, I feel like you saw what you just explained kind of being illustrated when we saw the impeachment hearing, especially in the House, when you heard testimony from a bunch of different diplomats. And I remember thinking, oh, these are serious people with a lot of experience that worked at the State Department under this administration. And of course, they're all being bounced out. But it also seems like Donald Trump is basically, do you think that he knows that there are people doing things in the government that he's not like ordering? Like, how often do you think he's like, don't we have people for doing that? I mean, are there people doing this or that? Do you think he has any idea about the functionality? Seriously, because he's a psycho. Does he have any idea about the functionality of our federal government as it pertains to anything domestically, much less, in terms of what the State Department's doing or internationally?
I mean, I think this has long been talked about, his lack of detail or understanding of how the U.S. government works. And I think he does understand certain things. I think he understands that he understands the things that he thinks advances his own interests. That I think he does. And those things that don't advance his interests don't raise to the level of his knowledge or understanding. So
or attention.
It just so this has long been discussed over the last couple of years. Everybody knew this guy lacked certain capacities, and he wasn't a guy. He was more of somebody coming in with no government experience, but not really interested in governing to begin with. And now you have a global pandemic of that's historic, and have a guy who's not really interested in actually leading in this moment. So he doesn't fully know, and that's okay. I think the most important thing is to let the people who do know what they're doing keep doing what they're doing, support their efforts, call it out when we think it's wrong, but for the most part, provide support, because it's in U.S. interest over the long term for these people to be successful. And so I don't care if it's a Trump appointee. I don't care if it's if it was a Biden appointee. They're doing the right thing. Let's support them. And if the president is above this and not paying attention to these issues, but others are, good. I think that's going to benefit us all, but it doesn't make up for the lack of top-level leadership that impacts both the U.S. image abroad and the capacity, ultimately, in the end, when it comes time for decision-making that has to be made at the presidential level. If you don't have a leader who's capable of doing it, that's where the gaps are. That's where the challenges lie in the White House with Trump. But it's not with the people below. It's not with the people who care about U.S. interests now and in the future.
Hey, Johnny, one thing also that is interesting, I think you've seen it, and I've certainly seen it, talking to people in Washington, is that folks on that sort of lieutenant level, if you want to call it that, of the government who are long-term appointees, they don't want to bring any attention to what they're doing. They don't want to, because the second that the White House figures out that some agency is doing something that it should do, but that they're operating on their own for the good of the country, Trump's people will attack that. So there's a lot of things that happen in this town that have sort of buttressed and maintained the forward momentum of things. You will not hear about it because people don't like to talk about it. Because once you do, then you suddenly are the nail that's sticking out and you get hammered down. So things are better than they look on a certain level. But still, in the end, that sort of bureaucratic capital is going to run out. And I think it's much easier for competitors of the United States to push around the country or take advantage of those gaps. Because when you're dealing with the Department of Commerce, who's doing something very good about trade, but you can have an oligarch in Russia talk to a friend of the president's who can then countermand that.
Right.
It's easy to get around the good people in the government. Two
questions on that. One, how much do those people and how much does their agenda change from one presidential administration to another? And is this massively different? Like from W. Bush to Obama, from Obama to Trump, how much does the interest, the relationship with Vietnam, with Angola, how much does that desk change the people and the agenda?
John, what did Palmerston say to Queen Victoria? Britain doesn't have friends or enemies, it only has interests. And I think that in the situation that we're in, generally speaking, relations change for key countries or where large developments happen. But overall, nation-state interests are what are going to control most of these situations. And, John, you're more the expert than me. Do you think that's a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I think, though, it changes a little bit when you have leadership that has their own interests in mind versus that of the country. And I think this is a little bit of a difference between this president, and I'm not going to even say the administration because I don't think it's fair to lump in sort of everybody within this administration in with Trump. So that's a difference. And I do think that the level of willingness for lower level lieutenants, as Bill calls them, to speak up is lessened today because of the concern about sticking your head out of the shell and getting it cut off. And we've seen this through numerous occasions through the impeachment trial, to going after diplomats, the vindictiveness of the president himself. So I think it's very different, and it's very limiting because there is this concern about stepping out and being cut down, whether you're Masha Yamanovich, in Ukraine or another diplomat.
Yeah, that brings me actually right to my next question, which is going to be, you guys live and work in Washington, D.C. I don't, but I hear certain things from folks who do work in the federal government. And what it seems like is there's a general fear of the White House, of Trump's wrath. And you mentioned, those who did stick their heads out. What was the guy, the army attaché,
Vindman?
Vindman. Vindman was such a prominent kind of thing that he did. It was so public, and so criticizing him, the dismissal of the inspector generals. We've never seen anything like this at this rate in this country. This kind of fear, you see it in other underdeveloped countries. Authoritarian leaders just firing people who are whistleblowers, and we used to think they're heroes. We have laws to protect them, but my question is, how much are people animated by their fear of the president and his wrath? from the White House to the I want to name neighborhoods in Washington D.C. and sound like an insider, but I can't. To state, to interior,
just don't say Foggy Bottom,
to Langley, from Langley to Foggy Bottom. How afraid are they
of
the president? Where's NASA?
So, Pete, I think that the fear in Washington is in the bureaucracy and in the executive branch is pretty intense, and on the Republican side of the Hill, because he has power to mess with those people. But I mean, you literally, and by the way, I should point out, Trump's human resources guy is talking about how the Pendleton Act doesn't really apply or shouldn't apply to the federal government. The Pendleton Act is the act that they enacted after Garfield was assassinated.
By the way, Trump's human resources guy is the Penguin from Batman, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure who that guy is, but he's probably an asshole.
Yeah. Well, they're getting all the winners at this stage of this administration. But the bottom line is, like, they're literally rejecting the idea of a non-political civil service. And so those people have to really worry because they have some power over them. I got to tell you something, though. Outside of that milieu of either in the Republican Party or someone they have the power to mess with in the bureaucracy, the only thing people are afraid of in Washington is what these jackasses are going to do to the country before they're out. No one's really afraid of Trump as a politician anymore. It's more that, they see him as a disaster.
I feel like they are, though. And same question to you, Katz. Are they afraid of the president's rep? Because I feel like they're afraid to speak up because he's going to. Did Katz disappear? I
think we might have lost Katz.
He died. That's hilarious. We'll wait for him to come back. Well, so I don't have to spend forever in the edit. Same question to you, Jon. Do you agree with Bill that a lot of the folks at a certain level aren't necessarily afraid of him? They're afraid of what he's doing, because I feel like they are afraid of him. If they come forward, if they blow the whistle, if they write the Jerry Maguire statement, they're going to get fired. They're going to lose their job, potentially, damage their career. Who knows? And he might go public. He might start tweeting about them.
Yeah. The intimidation is there. We've seen it publicly. It's been talked about. I really more want to point out that there have been people who have been willing to step up, and whistleblowers that have been willing to step up and into the breach over and over again to try to prevent bad things from happening. And sometimes it's actually been, it's been Congress stepping in, including in a bipartisan way. And so I would say that, it has an impact, but what you do see is that you see people stepping up. So I want to encourage those that are stepping up to continue to do so, regardless of administration and regardless of who's in the White House. And I think that's the most important thing, is to keep those people, doing the right thing and pointing out. And of course, what you mentioned before about these inspector generals, of course, in the middle of a coronavirus, is Trump going to get pushback for doing what he's doing? And the answer is no. I mean, you can't even hold congressional hearings right now.
Right.
And so hopefully when this all comes back, there will be a reckoning with the things that shouldn't have been done. But let's focus on those people who've been willing to step up, men, women, members of Congress, bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, independents, and point to them.
Well, I appreciate you highlighting the courage of those who do step forward. That's important, and we have seen a lot of that. We encourage that all the time. That was a value, I think, of not only Americans but decent people everywhere. But you use the phrase "when this all comes back." Let's say Joe Biden wins the election. Let's say Donald Trump loses the election. Let's say there's a peaceful handover of power and not a bloodbath during a November.
I think Bill just crossed himself.
Yeah.
Even this Jewish guy knows what that looks like there.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, whatever works at this point. But my question is about our relationships, Jon, with foreign countries, with NATO. Yeah. How I've heard that those relationships are damaged permanently or for generations, but it makes I feel like the whole world's like just on hold, waiting for the madman to leave and then get back to the way we used to feel about NATO.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly there's damage that's been done that will take time to rebuild relationships. If it's Biden, of course, I think people there's certainly more confidence in allies and how Biden might approach the transatlantic relationship and key challenges. Any new president coming in is going to be dealing with one of the most significant challenges. I would say economically more challenging than Obama and Biden had to deal with in 2008. And so I just, it will probably take the full attention of whoever comes in next, if that's what happens, in the fall, to deal first and foremost with the devastation here in the U.S., the economic situation, and find partners abroad to work with. And so I actually think that people, maybe the coronavirus will be if it is Biden, will be sort of the entry into building stronger relationships with the recognition that we need to work together, not apart. So, before this coronavirus hit, you certainly had one equation, one set of factors. Now you have something that's completely different that we weren't thinking about 4 months ago as the challenge. And so I think whatever president comes in has just really a monumental task ahead of him or her.
You said whatever president comes in. Is there any chance in your mind outside of an untimely death for Joe Biden that anything could happen that would replace Joe Biden on the ticket? Can we just dispense with that question and move on?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see any changes, and we'll see. He's got to pick a vice president. As somebody who's sort of an old hand back in the day running campaigns, I always, you don't know until these votes are counted, and you've never. I'm tracking a potential election in Poland, for example, right now, presidential election that's being potentially done under duress, where the Polish leadership right now wants this election to happen, and you're seeing under COVID-19 how risky this gets politically, legally, what might happen in the fall if we have a second round of coronavirus that peaks right around the election in certain states. There's just so many, there are these unknowns. And so just seeing what's happening globally, it makes you concerned about whether this election will happen in the manner that it should.
Well, if we can send every American a check, can't we send them all an absentee ballot, Bill? I mean, how hard is it?
They don't want that to happen. That's the issue.
But it's not. But just to be clear, it's not hard, right?
No,
to get their act together.
Yeah,
it's handled at the state level.
It works better, and older voters actually like it more. And the polling from older voters has gone up on that lately because of coronavirus. It's not out of the realm of possibility that part of the Trump camp thinking on not funding the post office and letting the USPS go under is that basically kills Democrats when it comes to voting by mail.
Right.
And by the way, the very first election ever where the voting by mail response was proportionately much stronger with Democratic voters, or either party actually, happened this year. The very first time that's ever happened, where the response was far heavier for the Democratic candidate. It's never happened far more for the Republican candidate. So if you're the Trump people, if you're the Mitch McConnell, you're looking at voting by mail as potentially being something that really hurts you for all the things you've done for voter suppression to help you win an election.
Isn't it handled at the state level, those ballots? No, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I mean,
they are handled at the state level, but if you kill the post office,
I've been
you kind of effectively finished that.
Talking about that and really worried about that. It would seem crazy. It would seem absolutely insane to let the post office die. Like, I feel like that's not being discussed enough. I had Carolyn Maloney on the show to talk about it, and there's a whole bunch of people in Democrats in Congress that are worried about it. But John, what is your concern about the election? Let's say that the pandemic is again raging, people don't even want to go outside.
Yeah, so the conduct of elections, you're right, states play a major role in determining the type of ballot, the machines that are being used, the modalities. And the crazy thing about the United States is that every state is different. And as somebody who was part of the 2000 election, Gore Bush, I worked for a member of Congress from a district that had the hanging Chad. Saw very much up close what happens when you have poorly designed ballots, lack of ballot security. So there's a real concern, even if you do this, as Bill was right, that one of the ways you could do it is by mail-in ballots. But states have to be ready for that. They have to have the security for it. You can't do it, 2 weeks before the election. You got to make the determination fairly soon. I think as states are looking at this and how they're going to ensure that there can be fair conduct of elections. And in the past, I mean, it's hard to feel confident right now about the modalities of an election that are just by mail-in without understanding fully what each state is putting into place in terms of security resources to make this happen. But it's an option. What worries me is that we won't be ready for that, and that we get to this position and, governors and states that maybe are favorable to Trump say, well, we're going to have to restrict voting hours. We're going to cut down. There won't be early voting. We're not going to leave them open, later if there's longer lines. Yeah. We're going to use every means to suppress voter turnout. And there's a potential for that to happen. We've already seen it in the past.
Yeah. The black neighborhoods, we're just going to have one place and one machine for millions of people. All right. So let's do VP talk a little bit. That's going to start heating up. But I want to get it started real quick. This is always a fun conversation to speculate about. And Bill, could you deliver your opinion on who you think Joe Biden should pick for his VP with your general arrogant sense of confidence on it?
Well, Pete,
do you mind?
Let me tell you.
Do you mind delivering it as per?
Sure. So 2 things matter. Number 1 is that Biden said he's picking a woman, right? Number 2, actually 3 things. Number 2, you pick a VP candidate who doesn't hurt you rather than help you. That's the reality of it. And 3, you need a VP candidate, particularly in Biden's case, who can step in and looks plausible as the president should Joe not be able to finish his term. I think that really restricts you to very few people. And I think it's basically Warren, Kamala Harris. I don't think the governor of Michigan is seasoned enough. I don't think Amy Klobuchar is not weird enough.
Now, I think you don't think she's not. What did you say? What's wrong with Klobuchar?
She's a little weird. And
Okay.
She doesn't play very well. I think there's John, I'm sorry, who was the guy who ran for Senate, the admiral in Pennsylvania?
Sestak?
There's a guy who ran for...
It was Sestak.
This Admiral Sestak ran for Senate.
I like how I answered it correctly, and you just fucking ignored me until John said it was Sestak. It was unbelievable. Hurtful.
Thanks for the assistance.
You're the pretty face. I'm sorry. So Sestak ran in Pennsylvania and lost, and part of the reason that he did not do so well, and part of the reason that he got nowhere at all when he ran for president again this time, and no one even knows, is because he was awful to his staff. And those reputations in Washington are generally never wrong. People say someone's awful to their staff. And
that's what they said about Amy Klobuchar. But what about what she brings or does not bring to the table?
She brings a state that you're probably already going to win anyway. And she's not, is she a good attack dog? Probably not. Is she someone who looks as good as Harris or Warren does to be president someday? Probably not. Does she help you with the African-American community to get up turnout? Definitely not. I don't see any compelling case for Amy Klobuchar except for the fact that she's from the Midwest. And that's it. There's no other, she's not charismatic. And you don't want Shelley Abrams because she's too charismatic and too on her own.
Can't even get her name right.
You don't want someone like Klobuchar who's like a wet loaf of bread. So I'm sorry.
I corrected you. You said Shelley. It's Stacey Abrams, and then you compared Amy Klobuchar to wet piece of bread, which has to be sexist. I don't know how I can make it sexist, but I'm going to. Katz, what do you think? Obviously, anything Bill said or that you agree with, disagree with, but I think the most important point he said is Biden did say he's going to pick a woman, so at least we know that's going to happen.
Well, yeah, I'll give Bill credit for that. Only for that right there, that piece. But I don't want to agree with him because it just inflates his ego.
Right.
And
got to be careful.
But I think he's, the one thing I think that somebody like Biden, who had such a close relationship with Obama, is likely to look for is somebody that he feels comfortable with. And I think, look, it's hard to, there's a number of names that are floating out there. They all bring different things to the table. And I think that Biden's going to pick somebody he feels comfortable with and going with. And I don't think that the VP isn't typically somebody who wins you an election, but you don't want them to lose an election. And right now, my guess is he looks for a safe choice that he wants to govern with. I don't think he's particularly looking at somebody and saying this is going to be the next president. But hopefully somebody who brings complements Biden that would be then given the keys to help, particularly with the economic recovery side of this. And so it might be more interesting than you think about in terms of who he picks as somebody who could actually help lead in an economic repression or depression of what we're going to see next.
Right.
So it may be more about that. And frankly, look, this election's not going to be about the VP pick. It's about Trump. It's about Trump. So so my expectation is do no harm, just like Bill said. Again, I don't want to agree with Bill Boyle on anything. But Bill Boyle does have to get the names right of people that he's mentioning. Yeah.
He just has so little respect that he couldn't even remember. It's Stacey Abrams. Those are my criteria. I'm less focused on it, and but I suspect that it's going to be both comfort, somebody who does no harm, somebody who has some competence in areas that will be needed to address. Let's recall that Obama handed the keys to Biden on a number of key domestic issues during his period there, and I think it's somebody who we can trust. Look, Biden, it is true. Regardless, didn't he leave the keys in the ignition and then walk away? And a couple of them.
I don't know.
I don't know about
metaphor. That, but
where's the keys?
Yeah, I think in this case, even I'm sure Biden understands limitations of his own limitations in this sense, and is really going to need a group of people around him, managers that can help us get through this crisis if that's what happens in November. All
right, last question, because I know, John, you have probably work to do, and Bill, well, if you want to stay for a few more hours, but it's this. I've seen a lot of people from stand-up comics to sharp political analysts say that something with the pandemic, with Trump's handling of the pandemic, might have broken the fever for, a certain percentage of people who were still somehow hanging in there and supporting Trump. That's always the analysis of the past few years is the fever breaking amongst the Trump supporter? What will it take? And a lot of people are pointing to, and maybe this is stupid, but I'd love to get your opinion on it. A lot of people are pointing to specifically his comments about injecting, disinfectant and eating Clorox tablets or whatever the hell he said there. That day was such an outrageous moment and amongst many in his handling here. Has anything changed in his handling with the pandemic that might have peeled off a few more Trump supporters, Bill?
I don't think that anything that he says changes anything for his core supporters. But I do think what he has been saying and what his supporters have been saying, which boils down to basically some folks have to die for the economy to go forward. And that's just the price we have to pay. And I think that his understatement of what's going to happen and him saying, I have no responsibility, et cetera, the only evidence, the actual evidence I've seen where that's hurting him is with older voters. He won voters over 65 by some crazy number, like 17 points or something in Florida. And right now in the polling today, granted it's early, but the polling today has him down by like 9 with voters over 65 in Florida. If that sticks, he loses Florida. And so I think it's always going to be about a cultural fight when you're talking about Trump. That's why people voted for him. They voted for him for race, class, regionalism.
But I understand that. But Jon Katz, is it a cultural fight? Is death part of that culture? Like, if people are dying around you that you love and that you care about, I don't know that people necessarily would then blame the president, the Trump supporter. But is that not evidence for this guy's? Don't people? I know Bill on this show, blamed him for the loss of his mom. I mean, that's obviously Bill Boyle, who's never been a supporter of Trump. But I mean, does the Trump supporter lose somebody and say, you know what? I'm not supporting this nut job anymore. Does that happen?
Yeah, I just had a small child sort of poke their head in.
Is it yours, or do you just have kids hanging out?
He just says, We try not to get into the prominence of the children.
He works at a daycare just to be more productive.
No, I actually think the economy is the major issue for voters and will be. And I think the difference between now and a few months ago was the unemployment levels, and perception of failed leadership, because Trump's biggest his trump card was you may not like me, but the economy is great and it's great because of me and it's never been better. Right. And he just can't walk around claiming this anymore. And I also think it exposed, I think, what people, those people who were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt previously, those that were on the fence that didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton. It's really hard to come back now and look at this guy and think that was a good decision. And I'll give Bill some credit on seniors too. I think one of the candidates that really appeals to this group and did previously was Joe Biden, especially in spaces like Florida. Biden, has a good connection, has a strong connection with that age group. And I know people thought it was a deficit to have, somebody of his age, but he actually appeals to that group, that generation, who trusts him. So I think there's my bet, and we can come back months later. I'm going to look at every demographic, maybe except for one or two of sort of white male between a certain age, and you're going to see Trump losing ground in from white women, suburban to elderly. He's just gonna lose votes in all this, and largely due to the economic situation, which anybody who is in his position right now would likely face some real political falling out from this if the election was held in the year that they were running. So I think it's always the economy that becomes the big issue.
All right, boys, really fascinating conversation. Loved having it. Backyard Politics with Jon Katz and Bill Boyle, two very experienced, credible guys inside D.C. know what the hell they're talking about. Thank you very much for joining me.
It's great to be here.
Thank you, Pete.
Take care.
All right, guys.
Bye. Cheers. Thanks, man.
All right. How'd you like that? I think I want to do that as often as possible, maybe weekly with those guys. A lot of fun. Great conversation. We could bring other people in. So there you are. Jon Katz, by the way, on Twitter at Jon D. Katz, no H in John. Jon D. Katz. Check out his podcast, which is at the German Marshall Fund, where he is a senior fellow now. And Bill B in D.C. That's his Twitter handle, at Bill B in D.C. Okay. My final guest of the show is Barry Ritholtz, at Ritholtz on Twitter. You should subscribe to his daily reads. Go to The Big Picture, which is one of the most popular blogs in the entire world of financial media. Of course, he is the founding partner of Ritholtz Wealth and one of my closest friends. We were talking about mostly his big article in Business Week, which is about his idea that we really need to go big, a moonshot right now to invest in our economy. I'm not so sure it'll work. We had a great discussion about that, but we start with Barry and all of our drinking right now. All right, let's start with this. You tweeted, you've been tweeting about your happy hour on a nightly basis, and then you just tweeted something about maybe you're drinking too much. What's going on?
Well, no, there was a New York Times article that people under lockdown seem to be drinking a lot, drinking frequently. Mm-hmm. So I'll have a drink every night, but I'm having a glass of wine or two. So far, it has not been in any way, shape, or form problematic. Right. If you're banging out a bottle of scotch each night, well, then you got an issue.
That's a real problem.
And so I asked people, hey, anyone having an issue managing their drinking under lockdown? And the response varied from, I've been sober for 6 months and I'm not going to let the lockdown interfere with that, to some really serious, hey, I'm having a hard time with this.
That's interesting.
And it's a good venue for people to, see other people discuss stuff.
For sure. Knowing that you're not alone and whatever you're dealing with is one of the most important things I think we can all do for each other. I always see life and habits and things like drinking and smoking weed and stuff as moderation, in moderation. And I would just say I'm doing a little bit more than I would, but I don't think that I ever use in a way that it affects me too much either way, much less the next day, much less my wallet. Like I stay within boundaries. I'm not too exciting. I'm not too experimental.
I'm with you on that. I think that's fair.
I don't like feeling drunk or getting drunk. I certainly don't like a hangover. That I am completely intolerant of.
Well, a hangover is your body's way of telling you you've had too much.
Yeah, I don't think my body needs to tell me that. I think I should be able to be at a point at age 44 that I don't need my body to tell me you had too much last night.
I know people in their 50s and 60s who still come into work.
I mean, I'm being
reeking of vodka and hungover.
I'm being a party pooper, but I'm saying, I like to have a good time. I like to drink. I just don't want to drink too much, like get crazy.
Yeah, I have the same. I have the same approach. It's like a glass of wine or two, a couple of beers.
I fall asleep too.
Yeah, my wife does also. To a glass of wine, we sit down in front of the TV, and as soon as she's snoring, bang, right to The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the Chicago
I just started watching it. Really great. So you don't have to like sports. So I want to talk with you about your big story at Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes.
It's very good and very important, and I want to discuss that with you and how much of a great idea it is, but how much of a fairy tale it is, how far we are from leaders of the past. It's titled, "The U.S. Needs Way More Than a Bailout to Recover from COVID-19. Shore up the markets, sure. But don't stop there," you write. "It's time for Congress and the White House to do things that have been unthinkable since JFK's moonshot. It's time to go big." Okay, so talk to me about how this country went big in the past.
So I could take you back to the Constitution, and we'll go forward from there. Built into the U.S. Constitution are very aggressive copyright and patent protections. And in fact, the U.S. system of patents was actually much superior to what they had in the continent. And so along comes cotton, and when Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, suddenly cotton becomes incredibly efficient and inexpensive and productive. Now, it didn't hurt that the labor was free. I mean, that certainly was another factor also in the Constitution. But the advantage that the cotton gin gave to the U.S.
By labor is free, means slavery. Yeah, go
slavery,
ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Enshrined in the Constitution. Yeah. But there's a fascinating book called Americana, which I've written about, a 400-year history of American capitalism. And the author's
I saw you mention that in this article, and I wasn't familiar with that book. It looks interesting.
It's quite fascinating. I wrote a review of it a couple of weeks ago. And so it's been on my mind before the coronavirus really got crazy. And before the lockdown really was pretty big and broad and effective. And basically the history of capitalism has been a joint partnership between the private sector and the government. So I mentioned patents and the cotton gin. Think about the railroad, cross-continental railroad wouldn't happen without the government and eminent domain allowing a straight line across the country to be basically purchased on behalf of the railroads by the government. Without eminent domain, they would have to negotiate with every single person. It would have taken, decades longer and would have cost 10 times. It wouldn't have been practical. The telegraph was funded in part as a joint operation with Uncle Sam. In fact, the whole idea behind Morse code and the telegraph, Congress paid for the first 25-mile test was a congressional thing. Municipal bonds was funded by New York State. The state held a contest to see if someone could create a steam engine that could move a substantial load of stuff on a boat against the current upriver on the Hudson. And if you could do that, you got an 18-year monopoly. And literally, that's how that was funded. The canals, the Erie Canal and other canals, was funded by New York State with the first ever concept of municipal bonds. Hey, we could buy bonds, we could issue bonds and use that to fund the construction of these canals. What ended up happening is they overbuilt canals everywhere, and then the steam engine and the railroad came along. But that was the original concept, and on and on. Radar was developed by the Navy. Radio was developed in a way that the government said, we're going to stop all these ham radio. It was free market mayhem. And the government said, no, you can't just broadcast on any bands. We're going to auction off the bands. And the government helped the private sector commercialize radio. So how much further you want to go? You could go up to the integrated circuit and NASA. You could go up to DARPANet, which eventually becomes the internet. There's a ton of that sort of stuff.
The question, I guess, is why does there have to be the public-private partnership? Why does capitalism and free markets not allow for, if someone, if there's money to be made, why wouldn't the private sector be able to fund this themselves? I mean, obviously taking out loans and financing the projects, inventions, and so on. But why does there have to be this major government public-private partnership for all these projects throughout history?
Very fair question. The private sector has a finite time horizon. Typically, if your lifespan is 72 years, you're probably not going to want to invest in something that won't pay off till long after you're dead. And so when you think of these projects, forget 75-year projects. You think of projects that are 20, 30 years in the making, the interstate highway system, the integrated circuit, just go down the list. The private sector doesn't have the patience and doesn't have investors willing to tie up money for that long. When we look at probably the longest investors out there, let's think of venture capitalists whose funds typically are 7 years long. That's a long time to say, I'm tying up my money. Now, you could be a long-term investor and not touch your 401k for decades, but you always have the option of accessing it. When you make a venture capital investment, you're making a 7-year commitment. And even that, people are very, very hesitant to do. 7 years is a really long time. But I'm trying to get this light just about right. Is that a little better?
Yeah, you look pretty great. You can't really see the contours in your face. What about the idea that that it's not in the interest of the private sector to invest in something? I mean, you can look at right now the argument over the post office and rural areas. You can look at broadband in rural areas. That a return on the profit, it's not worth it. It doesn't pay off for me to bring these electric lines all the way out to grandma on the sticks.
Right. That was exactly what the private sector
or deliver her insulin for 50 cents.
That's what the private sector had said in the 1930s. We can't electrify all of rural America, every farm, every ranch. That doesn't work. But what happened is the REA, the Rural Electrification, or REC company, basically figured out that, hey, we're not going to do this town by town. We're going to go out and say, hey, we got 100,000 miles of wires to string. Who's going to give me the lowest possible bid on these supplies? They worked with the private sector. This was part of the Reconstruction Finance Company. This was one of the subgroups, and they got it done. We could certainly do the same thing with broadband. And let me remind you, since I brought up both patents and slavery, something else that's in the Constitution is the U.S. Postal Service. And that is something that is not supposed to be run like a private company. It is a service of the government, so every citizen can be reached if necessary. And so by post and, Amazon, look at everybody who uses the post office. That's a really substantial percentage of the country. And to look at it like it's really not that significant a part of the economy or society is just ignorant. That it's crucial in lots of parts of the country.
In this great article, you write not only about the history of the public-private partnerships that have accomplished so much innovation and created, in many ways, the middle class in America. You talk about what needs to be done, and you have a list of ideas here, which is something I always love, not only a criticism of a problem, but solutions offered. But I will criticize this entire article because it's almost like a pipe dream. This idea that you have here in this great piece about a moonshot for the 21st century, it'd be great, but our leadership can't. The president of the United States can't tie his shoes, and even if he could, even if it was Obama or if it's Biden or even Bush before him, we are so divided that if you have a great idea, there will be somebody that's going to shit all over it just for the ratings, much less any other number of reasons. Why do you think that this country could get it together to do something big at this point? And don't tell me it just requires the right leadership. Because as long as Obama was a great leader.
I'm not going to tell you that at all. What I'm going to tell you is you have 30 million people who have filed for first-time unemployment benefits. Our unemployment rate is now 25%. We'll get the official data on Friday, but back of the envelope, that's about where we are. GDP fell about 4% for first quarter, but keep in mind that GDP is. I'm gonna shut the door so the dogs don't harangue us. So where were we?
Keep in mind that
25%. GDP fell 4% in Q1, but keep in mind, really, we didn't have much of a lockdown until the middle of March. Q2 is going to be the first quarter where we have a real full quarter lockdown, and GDP could be down 20%, 30%, minus 40%. Not unthinkable, depending on how bad or how much things improve, or if we end up opening up various states too soon and the virus comes back, as some experts have warned it will, not in the fall, but by giving up social distancing and sheltering in place too soon. So this creates the worst economy in history, the worst quarter, the worst month we've ever seen. This is, forget the financial crisis of 08-09. We've already exceeded in a month, in 4 weeks, we've already exceeded the job losses from that 3-year period. That's just, mind-boggling. What we may end up seeing is something that is worse than the Great Depression. The silver lining to that terrible news is it wasn't that the economy blew up and imploded on itself. This is an externality. This is like a natural disaster. And once we resolve it, and my assumption is we will eventually have some sort of treatment or protocol or vaccine or combination of all three, and life can begin to return to normal. But now that we're in the midst of this sort of crisis, this pandemic that has really revealed how far wealth inequality has expanded since the last financial crisis and the last set of bailouts, which, by the way, worked out great if you were in the top, 10, 20% of the economic strata. If you own real estate, if you own stocks, if you own bonds, the past decade has been fantastic. If you didn't, well, you were lucky to just be treading water and staying in place.
Right. So the crisis has revealed this wealth inequality, and the problem now is so deeper and far and worse than anyone living has ever seen. Arguably even worse than depression it will be. And what's the point? That the fact that we're all dealing with such a horrible, impactful situation that we're somehow going to come around and unify over a solution, much less what caused the problem. Right now, the administration can't even decide who to blame.
If only there was an opportunity for the whole country to cast their vote on the leadership of the entire country, of the Congress, of the House,
let's say they do, and let's say that Donald Trump goes away quietly, which is highly unlikely, and Joe Biden takes over. We still have the issue of unifying together over a common purpose. It seems so obvious that we need to do the things that you prescribe in this awesome article, and I do want to talk about them, but I just want to get to the psychology and the politics of this. How do we unify around anything anymore?
I don't know. That's a good question. I have no idea.
Okay.
So I'm honest. I think I could tell you what we've done historically,
right,
and I would extrapolate from that going forward. Historically, you have a person who comes forward, who is charismatic, who has great ideas and the ability to communicate those ideas effectively, and they lay out a task for the American public, and they rally them around that task, and off we go to the races. And I can give you time, dozen examples throughout history.
Yeah, you can, except for I would raise you to Obama and the stimulus, which you read about in this article, or Obama and healthcare. These were straightforward problems. Not straightforward. They were complicated, but everybody knew that they were problems. And as soon as he offered what were feasible solutions, Republicans either said no, not at all, even if they were Republican solutions, or and major watered down versions, or demagoguing. It's going to, throw your grandmother off the cliff and all of that. I mean,
death panels.
Death panels. Yeah. I mean, so even when you have a great leader with thoughtful, important solutions, workable solutions, we now know Obamacare has been overwhelmingly successful, even though it's been handicapped in so many different ways. Even when you have that leader offering those problems, you got Hannity screaming.
I have a pet theory that pisses some people off, but I'm happy to share that theory with you. And it goes something like this. The financial crisis of 07, 08, and then into 09 was so overwhelming that it overcame what probably is a lot of vestigial racism throughout the country, because the Republicans, the party of Bush, no matter who they nominated, that was a dead man walking. And my pet theory is people were so upset at what had taken place with the bailouts and under the Bush leadership that the first American president of African-American heritage was probably brought forward a decade or two. I'm spitballing here. So that created a certain issue which Mitch McConnell and others were able to effectively tap into.
Right.
Some guy started screaming that Obama wasn't born here and I want to see his birth certificate. And that was a successful enough lightning rod that he eventually became president. But if you think about that I don't know how else to describe that other than there was a racist backlash to the first American black
I think
president.
That's a pretty good accurate.
Right. And
there's a lot of catalysts, but that's certainly
hamstrung his ability to get stuff. He still got a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that Obamacare has been a huge victory. If anything, the pandemic has revealed that, of course, you have to have everybody in the country covered by at least basic medical care. You can't have people not going for a COVID-19 test or not going to a doctor and instead just infecting everybody they come into contact with because they don't have health insurance.
Sorry. Well, yeah, that's for sure. But sorry to be so pessimistic and negative. I mean, let's say you came up with a vaccine and it worked. I mean, what percentage of Americans do you think would be afraid to actually take that vaccine because they think Bill Gates is going to control them? It's a frighteningly large percentage that we can't sadly dismiss.
No. So let me push back on that.
Please do. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't think I have been wrong on these conspiracy theorists yet. I think people like you dismiss them because for whatever reason, and then they get elected.
I'm aware of them. So here's the
Trump got elected. He's an anti-vaxxer, and he's the president of the United States. It's not fringe. It's mainstream.
He got elected by narrowly threading the needle in 5 states with less than 80,000 votes.
Yes, but it's not. That's the depth. It's not fringe. You're right. It's not fringe, though. It's mainstream thinking for far too many people. 30% of Americans, that climate change isn't real, that Bill Gates is controlling you, and that you shouldn't get the vaccine.
That's not 90% of Americans. That's
no,
a small
I said 30%. Enough to win a narrow election.
Well, when you have Fox News spreading misinformation, and when you have other sources of agitprop and Russian bots on social media, that's their goal. Their goal isn't to necessarily convince people of anything. It's just to create confusion and a lack of confidence in institutions. That's how you destroy a nation from within. But here's the pushback to the anti-vaxxers, the flat earthers, the collection of high-functioning morons that really we all can do without. And my pushback goes something like this. Before the internet, every town had a guy walking around talking to himself, muttering, sometimes researching crap on microfiche in the library, sometimes wearing an aluminum hat to stop them from reading his mind. Every town had a crazy talking to himself and researching nonsense in the like that. The internet has taken one fucking idiot from every single town across America, and collectively that's a few 100,000 idiots.
Yes.
And online it looks like, oh my God, look how many idiots there are. No, that's all of them. That's all 200,000 of the major idiots in the country. Out of 330 million people, it's a tiny percentage. And the problem that you run into is I call it denominator blindness. You're just seeing the group, but you're not seeing out of how many. So if there's I don't know, if 1% of the world are idiots, stop and think about it. That means, that there's 70 million idiots in the world. That's a lot of idiots. Well, it's only 1%. And that's the problem is,
they vote.
I think it was the governor of Virginia or Maryland, who there were a bunch of people protesting at the State House.
Yeah.
Open the state up more. And the response was, that was an interesting crowd that was there, but more people in my state died of COVID today than attended that protest.
Right.
And that puts it into really stark relief, really good context.
Well, it's just these people are so stupid that they're going out and protesting, and during the protest, they're contracting the actual virus. I have a solution
that resolves all these issues that you've raised.
Go ahead.
And let's start the Trump rallies again. Let's get all these people in a tight
problem is that they
a stadium and no masks, no gloves. Everybody, I believe the bullshit that you hear come out of my mouth. I think we should be sheltering in place. I'm staying home. When I have to go out and either get a prescription filled or go to the supermarket or do something like that, I have gloves, I have a mask, everything goes into the garage where it's wiped down with alcohol. I am not messing around. I have shit to do, and I can't afford to die until I cross a whole bunch of stuff off my list. And that's really serious, because if you don't take this serious, a number of evangelical ministers said, don't worry, God will protect us. And Google how many evangelical ministers have died for not following the rules. And listen, if you believe God will protect you, you have to also believe that God sent this pandemic around, and he also told you how to protect yourself. You're not listening to the whole story. You got to get the whole thing in. And I'm not remotely suggesting, I don't want anyone to think I'm belittling anyone's faith or belief. You can't just look at part of it and ignore the rest. Hey, he gave us gloves and masks and alcohol also. Why are you ignoring that? Alcohol, rubbing alcohol in soap. You're ignoring half of the conversation. And it's a tragedy. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it's really frustrating to watch these people.
No doubt about it.
Should know better, but don't.
Getting back to your article, though, in your ideal world with a great leader and a somewhat unified country, we'd be using these public-private partnerships that we'd seen in the past to build technological platforms and infrastructure for the future. Right. And then you have this list of potential areas, which is long, but a few ideas: climate remediation, sustainable energy, infrastructure, smart roads, digitized healthcare, asteroid mining. I want to ask you about asteroid mining and smart roads, and if we have time, the others. But
and by the way, the single biggest suggestion that people had emailed me about, and I was limited to 2,500 words, so I had to stop there. But what you said about extending broadband to rural areas and other parts of the country. That's
still a big need for that?
Absolutely. And a lot of people said, hey, let's put that on the list. I'm like, okay, I'll add that to my list.
I didn't.
All right, so which one do you want to start with?
What are smart roads?
All right, so smart roads are pretty easy. Right now, we all know self-driving cars are inevitable. They're coming. Right now, they're relying on LiDAR, a form of radar, and visual sight, and there's no reason to be so subject to problems like fog or rain or snow that's covering lines on the road. You can build something into the roads. You could build something into every vehicle as long as we agree on uniform standards. So every vehicle can tell exactly where every other vehicle is on the road. They can tell where the edges of the road are, where the bridge overpass is. They could tell where the off-ramp is with far greater precision than what they're doing now with camera-based visual driving.
Right now, the cars are doing their best to navigate the road, but it would be helpful if the road itself had sensors built into it.
Hey, I'm a road. I'm over here. Oh, you want to turn left? Here's my left.
Hey, can you
watch the bridge? Here's a sign. Don't go past this bridge.
Can you do a better impression of a road?
That's my only.
That's all you can do.
Impression of a road.
That's too bad. I was really hoping you'd give it another effort. It's like the 60 Minutes thing. Could you say that a little differently?
Right.
Asteroid mining.
So it's funny.
This is really
this is the one.
How do we know?
This is the one everybody pushed back the most on.
Oh yeah.
And this has been around for this is not anything new, aside from the fact that it's part of the premise of one of my favorite sci-fi shows, The Expanse, but hold that as, and Jeff Bezos is as well. But there have been stories and articles in Wired magazine from NASA about they keep identifying these asteroids and by the way they move and how the gravity affects other things. Hey, the only thing that's this heavy is gold or titanium. We think this asteroid is worth $2 trillion and that asteroid is worth $500 billion. And the idea is, just as sending a man to the moon led to all sorts of innovations, whether it's GPS or integrated circuits or miniaturization or fireproof materials or water filtration. I mean, the list of things that came out of the Apollo program are astonishing. If we have to say, let's do this, then we'll create a series of rockets that will be automated and robotic that will go out to these various asteroids, land some sort of device on it, check and see if you can verify what the composition of that asteroid is. Is it sufficient to send a mining vehicle up to start extracting the valuable minerals in it? If it is, they plant a beacon on it and they move on to the next. And then the next ship goes out after it. And it's not that complicated to see that in 20, 30, 40 years, somebody's going to be making a ton of money bringing back things like titanium and gold and some of the other rare earth minerals and some of the other valuable minerals. I believe cobalt was on the list and nickel.
Yep.
The list keeps changing, and I'm sure I'm misstating some of the elements, but there's a long list of valuable materials that are essentially, if you think of the asteroid belt as the planet beyond Mars that never quite finished forming, it's a whole planet's worth of minerals waiting to be harvested.
You also mentioned this idea of climate remediation. 9 of the 10 warmest years in recorded history have occurred since 2005. You're right. What's been missing from the attempts to address global warming has been a comprehensive search for a huge technological solution to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or perhaps a series of smaller ones that cumulatively have a substantial impact. Accelerating this process could have implications for avoiding what might likely be humanity's next great crisis. Well, it likely is, no doubt about it, unless we have another pandemic, I suppose, or this one just is unsolved. But, again, here, I just don't understand why the private sector can't get its act together. I mean, from insurance companies to other manufacturers and industries, it's really only the fossil fuel industry that's holding us back, and they're doing their darndest to hold on to what is in the ground and make a profit off of that before we innovate. But all of the other industries and it can make so much more money. Why do you think we haven't gotten our act together yet?
So 2 reasons. First, when we look at how things like solar and wind and battery storage has progressed, these have been a series of really iterative, small improvements. Now, over the past 20 years, it's a huge, huge improvement from what it was in the year 2000, but it still are just small incremental gains. And we need a Manhattan Project. We need an order of magnitude change. You think about the difference between dynamite and the atomic bomb. By applying the work of Einstein and others, some theoretical physics, into the concept of fusing 2 elements together to create a bomb and give off a whole lot of energy in the process, that becomes a just game changer in terms of what's generated. If we were to do something like that in terms of battery storage, if we're doing something like that in terms of solar efficiency, those are the sort of things that if successful, could make energy incredibly cheap, incredibly available. And think about what that means for high energy intensive industries that suddenly have the ability to produce things much, much less expensively. It's sort of funny. I was in Iceland, and it's a strange and beautiful landscape. It's sort of alien. And in fact, they film all these different movies there, including Game of Thrones and elsewhere, because it looks like no other place you've ever seen. It's just surreal. And on the road from the airport into Reykjavik is this giant Alcoa aluminum smelting plant. And I asked one of the locals, why on earth would someone locate a smelting plant in Iceland? Is there aluminum here? What's the deal? And the answer was, oh, no, we have a ton of geothermal power, and energy here is practically free. And aluminum smelting is so energy intensive that it's cheaper to locate the plant someplace where energy is cheap and ship the aluminum in than to build a plant where the aluminum comes out of the ground, but energy is expensive. And just now think about every industry where it's really very energy intensive, and it becomes a game changer. You really can shift production to where you want. You really have the ability to generate a lot of good jobs in really interesting industries when the price of energy drops dramatically. Now, there will be disruption and turmoil in the legacy businesses, but that is just the nature of
That's always been
technologies.
It's always been the case. This article at Business Week, the U.S. needs way more than a bailout to recover from COVID-19. Barry Ritholtz, before I let you go, did you hear that the Trump administration has announced, or at least it's leaked, that they're considering disbanding the coronavirus task force sometime this month? So are they rooting for like a landslide loss in November? What are they hoping for? I don't know. I said that they want to get run out of town and tar and feathered. I mean, if the election was today, Trump loses by a substantial margin. The election is 6 months away, and I know that in politics, 5 months away. I know that in politics, that long is it's a lifetime. That said, I'm shocked that this is even under consideration. We're just about 70,000 deaths. We're within spitting distance of that. The latest model that the government uses is now talking about 130 to 150,000 deaths. By November, we could be closer to 250,000 deaths. I don't know what they're thinking. Every time I watch a guy on TV start a sentence by saying, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I just want to say, shut the fuck up and here's some good advice. Listen to the medical experts, listen to what the doctors and what the epidemiologists themselves have to say. We don't need more armchair epidemiologists. And it would be nice if our leadership respected and appreciated what the experts have to say. My mental health moment every single day is flipping on the TV at 11:45 and just watching 15 minutes of Andrew Cuomo, just as a reminder for what does an intelligent, articulate, competent leader sound like? He's getting Cuomo. If this would have started a year earlier, Cuomo would probably be the. That's the hottest show on TV, the Andrew Cuomo Hour. It's just like you just kind of want to take a deep breath and say, all right, someone knows what the hell they're doing. And it's a pleasure to feel like, all right, in New York, someone is in charge. It makes you feel good. Do you say pedophile or pedophile? Go either way. If you're British, I'm just wondering. Are you watching Ricky Gervais's Afterlife? No, I'm just wondering because you say epidemiologist and it's epidemiologist. Because Gervais calls them pedos. Oh, is that right? And the Brits are pedos or short for pedophiles. But epidemiologist, it's a hard word to make. It's a hard word to shorten and make cute. Pedophile. Pedo. So isn't that what Elon Musk called the cave guy? That's right. That's right. He got in a little bit of trouble. He got Elon Musk. I wonder what Elon Musk becoming a father is going to do to Tesla. I have no idea. Hey, as long as you brought up Tesla, it doesn't matter if Tesla, the company, survives. Tesla, the idea, has already won. And they shared Every car company is moving to electric. Yeah. Well, I don't care if it's Mercedes or Volvo or name a company. It's over. They have a line of electric cars. That debate is over. Yeah, Musk won. Now, whether Tesla has market share 10 years from now, who knows? Who cares? It's that the transition away from fossil fuels is now substantially underway. And he'll be looked at the same way we look at Henry Ford and other people who really changed their entire industry. Barry Ritholtz, everybody. At Ritholtz. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Pete. I hope I didn't offend too many people today. No, I don't think he offended anybody. Did he? I don't think so. All right, that's it. Thanks to my parents. Thanks to Jon Katz and Bill Boyle. Of course, Barry Ritholtz right there. And thank you to all of you who are paying subscribers on Patreon. If not, go to the show notes and click the paid subscription link. Tomorrow, I know, is show 100. My plan right now, and things always change, is to reach out to as many listeners as I can to talk to them about how they're doing. Of course, thanking people for being subscribers to the show. But I'll reach out to paying subscribers and talk to them about how they're dealing and navigating in this new world that we're in. And that's how we'll celebrate episode 100. I had all kinds of different crazy ideas. But, it's just me, so I can't do anything too crazy and wild until I assemble a team. If that ever happens, I don't know. I don't know if I'm even going to want to. But I thought I would thank folks who are paying subscribers. If you're not, please sign up. Thank you to all the new subscribers today that signed up. And I look forward to talking to you and hearing from you. So reach out to me if you want to have a conversation about how you're doing, how you're dealing, what you're learning, how you're navigating this crazy situation that we've all been in and it looks like we are going to continue to be in for the time being. Looking forward to talking to you. Thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you tomorrow. You're not alone. I love you. Talk to you then.